Hello everyone. Today we're looking at a game between Henry Steel and Ryan van Rensburg. As I don't have a photo of Ryan Pierre, I'm doing what Agate Mato does, but I don't have a hooded man. I've got a hooded ostrich, and the woman on the ostrich doesn't really indicate anything. So if you have a photo of him, please leave a link in the comment section. I would like a photo to use in my future videos. Until then, he's a hooded ostrich. And this game comes from the 2016 African Lounge I Am Norm tournament, where Henry Steel managed to tie for first place, and Ryan Pierre van Rensburg got, let's just check again, he got fifth place, only failing against Watu Kubisi and Henry Steel himself. So let's get into the game. It's a short and sweet game, and it really teaches us something about the Sveshnikov. Still struggle to say it. So I'm thinking I will revert to the original name, the Losker Pelican variation. Okay, so we know what's coming. D4, C takes D4, and knight takes D4. We're in the Sicilian, and the move knight F6, knight C3, and we have an open Sicilian, and the move E5, going into the specific Losker Pelican variation. And now white has got a few options to retreat his knight to. These are four options that aren't seen as much as the modern variation, the Sveshnikov, which Carlsen and Caruana play regularly. And there's something to be said for each of these moves. Specifically, knight f5, you will have to deal with d5, though it is playable after e takes d. You get into quite an endgame quite early on, and black should be more than fine after knight f5. After knight f3 and knight b6, these two moves, and probably knight e2 as well. Just a simple bishop b4 suffices as a move for black, because white immediately needs to deal with the e pawn. Okay, and the same with knight b3, also simply bishop b4, and knight e2, not so regularly seen, but now bishop c5, aiming at this pawn, could be tricky, and now you need to spend a few moves to develop this bishop. So this e5 move is actually played with the idea of knight g5 being the strongest move, and black needs to refute this. So Sveshnikov came with the line d6 first, just to avoid the knight from infiltrating. And the infiltration isn't that bad. You can in some cases allow it. Let's say with a move like h6, you can allow knight d6 check, and after this type of trade, you can actually trade queens down and go into the endgame as black. But the issue is you don't have the bishop pair anymore, and this is an initiative white is looking for. So you want to avoid that. So the main move is just so if h6 is d6, keep holding on to the bishop pair and filling the square. And now the critical line starts with bishop g5 immediately. And if you try and bishop d5 is actually just really contending for this d5 square. As you see, the knight is attacking the square. So another way to play this could be to go knight d5 immediately. And this we also saw in the Carlsen Caruana games. And white's got play on the queen side, so black starts playing on the king side. But black should be fine, as we saw in the massive amount of draws 2 years ago. Okay, so in the game d6, bishop g5 is tried, and bishop g5 is actually pretty tricky, because after the move a6, okay, Hikaru plays this following move, and not that often, but there's a bit of a trick after bishop takes f6. The idea being that you need to go g takes f6, so you're kind of ruining black's position immediately. If something else is tried, like queen takes f6, then you're obviously just falling for knight c7 check. So g takes f6 needs to be played immediately. and then the knight goes to a3 as in the main line, and then b5, and actually in this variation sometimes f5 gets played. So white will need to prep both these moves probably. So, but still it's fine. You can force that knight off immediately and double the pawns, but knight a3 is played. Okay, and now the move b5, the critical move. And an older variation of this Sveshnikov usually saw bishop e6 played in this position before b5, but b5 is actually the new invention and the idea behind the Sveshnikov. Bishop e6 is called the bird, and it's also very playable, but b5 really asks white, what are you doing about this fork coming up? And I'm contending for the c4 square, so white needs to go knight d5. You could also play bishop takes f6 immediately, and now queen takes f6 is also, I think, a bit flawed after knight d5. The queen needs to go to d8. And now there are quite a few approaches to play against this mistake or inaccuracy. The one way is the more aggressive computer way, to sack your knight on b5 and then simply to head into c7. So you're basically inviting queen a5 check, which seems to fork the knight, but that is simply shut off with c3. And notice the queen can't take the knight because of this fork, just winning the queen. So the queen, instead, something like king d8 needs to be played to cover the c7 square. And white has simply just had good games in this line. Black avoids this with all costs. The other way, instead of sacking this bishop, is to go c4 immediately. And this is the old theoretical way of playing against this. Basically saying that my bishop is entering somehow and you are terribly weak on d5 and this is just a massive knight. How are you dealing with that? And that's more than enough compensation for white. Okay, so in the game, knight d5 is played immediately because you can't anticipate a blunder like queen takes f6, and g takes f6 is fine. Okay. Also giving up the bishop there, but trying to play with the knights. Knight d5 immediately is a bit more tricky. Defended with bishop e7. Now bishop takes really secures that knight. Since this knight is actually being attacked now, the pin is free. Black can capture this knight. And then it's actually a bit of a tactic. So let's say bishop here, suddenly knight takes e4. It's very tricky because now your bishop's hanging. So trying to recapture the knight is going to lose a piece, the bishop. And going for this little tactic, e takes, and like this, simply walks into bishop takes g5. And then, okay, well, you've got some material back. Black is finally playing d5, and this pawn is a goner, and your knight's on a3, and black's happy. So, okay, white can't just do anything, can't castle immediately after, you can't play something like bishop e2 and try and castle in this situation. You need to figure out how to play against this knight now. So, in the game, bishop takes f6, saying his knight is particularly good. Okay, so a few more developing moves now. c4. The more basic approach to play this position, and it doesn't risk too much as white, is to go c3, and this stops b4 and shuts out the knight for a while. And white doesn't risk too much. He's basically playing for a draw or a win. But c4 is a bit more aggressive. It's aiming to get this knight in immediately, but it's also allowing b4. Okay, knight c2 and rook b8. Now b3. Fixing this pawn on c4 now, and this knight is just the star piece of the game. We have bishop g5, and maybe just aiming to free up the queen of babysitting the bishop, so making castles a bit more wantable, and also getting into this diagonal here, which gives the bishop more squares. And we have castles, bishop g2, bishop d6, castles, king h8, and now f4. And now we slowly start seeing the spatial advantage white has grasped after going c4 and making sure this knight is still on d5. Okay, bishop h6 and f5. Now the sad thing about this game is that black doesn't really do anything drastically wrong. The spatial advantage just seems to convert this game for Henry Steel. and we'll see why in a second. Okay, so bishop takes d5, and now e takes d5. And now you've got this massive pawn chain, and black's bishop is on the dark squares, so not much to do about these pawns. Also, white has limited his own bishop, but he's got some potential for going into e4 now. He's opened that square up for his bishop. So we have knight d4, and this doesn't really give up a pawn, because after knight takes, simply bishop check first, and then you can probably even go e takes here. I didn't look at that. But this also seems fine. A great bishop, but the move most likely bishop takes. And black is really fine. So that knight can't really be taken. So for now, simply f6, prying open that king side. And okay, now you don't want to do anything about opening up this diagonal or maybe weakening yourself. So he starts with knight takes c2 first. After queen takes c2, now the move g6. And slowly but surely we see that we've got opposite side bishops and rooks and queens on the board. So no more knights anymore. And these types of positions should be very drawish, but white has managed to secure quite a lot of space. So let's see how he goes about playing a closed position with opposite side colors bishops. Simply developing the rook, centralizing it, queen f2, defending that pawn. And here Pierre decides to trade queens. And whether that is right, I'm not too sure. Because now white starts improving his position much more easily and without too much risks. So basically now black is staring into these pawns of white, and white manages to bring his king into the center. One big improvement for Team White. While black's bishop is actually rendered useless, because you're not getting at one of the pawns on the black squares, and all of these are protected. It's not clear how you are advancing your own pawns, so simply king h7, and now white starts advancing. g4, h takes g4, and bishop takes g4. Now the following move isn't a mistake by Pierre. The computer recommends it, and that is bishop f4. But probably just sitting back and waiting for white to do something could have been a better option. Stuff like h5 is coming, and you need to deal with this. So trying to capture is going to open a completely new file, and this would simply be lost, because now the rooks enter. So it's impossible to capture, but you need to kind of allow white to advance. And the point of the position is that f7 is going to be a problem with tempo. So what Pierre does is he proactively plays bishop f4 to shut down some communication and to stop this pawn's advance from being too devastating. But simply in the game, rook takes f4 was played. And after the exchange was sacked, notice there's not much to do after rook takes. You need to go for that exchange sack. Now we see the beauty of these pawns in combination with the bishop and rook. Even though black has got two rooks, the e7 square is cut at, and both these squares are cut at. So basically black isn't going to double his rooks anytime soon. Until then, black just plays king h7, and we've got rook e7. Notice you cannot capture this rook, because simply f takes, and black is probably, f takes, and now c5, creating a new pass pawn. And rook takes e7, simply c takes d6. And black is always on the defensive now, with this king coming in very quickly. So this rook cannot be captured because of the big threat e7 creates. Now black tries rook c5, which is fine. And now black just needs to wait. Remember, he can't retreat back into c8 where he'd want to, because this would probably, it would give up the exchange again. Doing so would also drop f7, which is a very big pawn in this position. So it's not just an exchange, it's the f7 pawn too. And now we've got rook c5, and the move bishop d7. Bishop d7 is very tricky to deal with, because it's it's aiming to just pick up your f7 pawn. And so now black should probably just defend the pawn. Rook f8. And after some more developing moves, we're basically waiting for white to do something special. Bishop a4. Look how black cannot coordinate at anything. Rook c8. It's probably just giving up this pawn with tempo in any case, so you're probably just going to go rook c5. And then white has made some progress. He's picking up this pawn. So positionally, this bishop is just a very strong piece. It's way stronger than this rook. But it cannot be captured by the rook as well, because of the strength of white's other pieces and how active they will be after this rook is even traded. So holding on to the rook is kind of a necessity in this position. So after the move bishop d7, we have rook c7. Trying to pick up the bishop, get rid of the rook, maybe just attack a passed pawn. But now simply the move bishop c6, regenerating the threat of rook takes, and now simply f takes, and it being game over. Now in the game he played rook dc8. I'm not too sure how great that was. Rook cc8 kind of says, okay, well, you're getting my f7 pawn, and you are probably advancing here as well. But at least my two rooks will be guarding the back rank. This is still pretty bad for black, even after this. Okay, so in the game he played the other rook there, and then simply white just traded, and then went c5. c5 is just such a strong move, and probably a move you wouldn't find that easily as an amateur player. The idea is that after d takes c5, you are simply entering with your king to king e5. Leaving that pawn would just be a mistake. Trying something else would just walk into this, and now your rook needs to go all the way back and babysit this pawn forever while this king just walks in. So this would be over. So he takes the pawn. Sorry, in the game the pawn is taken, and now king enters. One more thing is tried in the position. I don't think you can do much about this position white has. Just an excellent position. Maybe something like c4 could have made stuff more tricky, but simply b takes, and you realize that these pawns are just too far away to help clear the path. So what is tried in the game is fine. g5, king h5 would also walk into king d6, and now after rook a7, trying to keep this closed, you have simply king takes c5. Now though this king is getting to h4, king b6 is a bit of a rook trap, so you can't take h4 yet. You need to do something with your rook. Rook c7, but now simply d6, rook c8 trying to guard this back rank, d7, and rook d8 or whatever. This king enters, and this pawn, although advancing, is going to be caught by the bishop, so that can't happen. So in the game, we just have g5 immediately, trying to do something with that pawn on the side, trying to get the king closer, but simply king d7 again. And this pawn is not fast enough, and this is calculated. You can't try running the pawn, because simply the bishop opens, and white's getting the queen first. So that's not possible. And he tries rook c8, retreating, but now final move of the game, just king d7. And black resigns. Because no matter what you do, your pawn is just way too far behind, and keeping the rook, let's say, on the 8th, waiting for this pawn to advance, white just getting rid of your passed pawn immediately, and you can simply play something like king e7 and walk up his own pawn. And there's not much to do about this, except maybe play for another pawn, but this is a one end game. Even if we make a hypothetical situation where white plays a bit badly, we can say something like Okay, let's say black's clever and he gets behind the pawn, and maybe he takes a pawn before going after this pawn. That would be his best idea. But even in a situation like this, uh, white can play a move like this, create two passed pawns, and it becomes very tricky to defend. King d6. You can probably just take this pawn as well, or not. Just first help your pawn through, or defend like this. More accurate. Anyways, I was playing bad in the end there. Don't regard that as anything too important. This should be over. So Pierre resigns after the move King d7 in the game, and just a great game. And it was a bit sad because I really felt Pierre didn't really go wrong, but then the game really opened my eyes into Henry's strength, because this was actually played on such a grandmaster level, not just IM level, that this type of advantage just started growing and growing positionally. And then he basically waited until this moment where black didn't really have any other options but needed to keep the bishop active, and walked into this exchange sack, and then black's pieces were just too inactive. And rook c7 was then the blunder according to the computer, but you can really go try alternatives for black. This position is just so bad to play as black and defend. And if you go look at the computer evals as well, I hope that comes up. Oh, just the basically Henry still had an average of 15 centipawn loss, and Ryan only 22. So he played a good game, and that was the difference between winning and losing. Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope the exchange sack was as aesthetically pleasing for you as it was for me. Enjoy.